What are the 10 emptiest stadiums in England? Let's take a look. Based on last season's attendances, I've gone ahead and found the 10 emptiest stadiums in the 92, based on the highest percentage of empty seats. Now there could be a number of factors in terms of why a stadium is empty, whether it's down to fans losing interest, a bad ownership that are being protested against, or it could be as simple as that stadium is just too big for where that fan base is right now. If you're going to enjoy today's video, make sure to go ahead and drop a like, but without any further ado, let's just jump in. Starting out in 10th place, we do have Blackburn Rovers, the only championship club to feature on this top 10 list. On average last season, Ewood Park was only 49.7% full, which meant there was a lot of empty seats. Blackburn had average attendances of just over 15,500, but compared to the 31,300 that stadium holds, it does leave quite a few empty seats that are dotted around. Now it has been well documented, I think just Ewood Park is just too big for where that fan base is right now. It was a stadium that was built with Blackburn being a Premier League club in mind. And to be fair, during Blackburn's Premier League days, they were getting significantly higher attendances, but after over a decade now, below the top flight, attendances have dwindled in that time. And Blackburn are actually in joint 10th place for this video with Walsall, who also only filled 49.7% of their stadium on average last season. Now to be fair to Walsall, they actually hit a 16-year high in the 23/24 season for home attendances, proving that the number of match-going fans at Walsall is continuing to grow. However, with average attendances of around 5,600, that's still only around half of the 11,300 the Bank Stadium holds. Coming in 9th place, we've got the Pirelli Stadium. With a capacity of just under 7,000, it is one of the smallest grounds in the 92, but also one of the emptiest as well. Last season on average, Burton had around 3,400 match-going fans, meaning that only 49.5% of that stadium was full on a match week. Coming in 8th place, you've got Adams Park, which was only 49.1% full based on last season's attendance at Wickham. Now that ground does hold 10,100 or thereabouts, and last season Wickham were getting average gates of around about 4,900 fans. Compared to previous years, Wickham's home attendances did dip ever so slightly. Discounting the COVID years, last season was actually Wickham's lowest average attendances since 2017/18, which I thought was quite interesting. And it's a joint 8th place with the Wham Stadium, with Accrington Stanley fans also selling just 49.1% of their ground out on average. Now based on home attendances from last season, Accrington Stanley do have the second smallest support in the 92, with average home gates of just over 2,600. The Wham Stadium has a total capacity of 5,450, meaning that generally it is less than half full on a match day. The 7th emptiest stadium in England is the Keepmoat Stadium, where Doncaster Rovers play. Now to be fair to Doncaster, they did have the 8th best support in League 2 last season based on the home gates they were getting. Just over 7,000 fans Doncaster are getting on a regular match day at the moment, but with the Keepmoat Stadium having a capacity of over 15,000 fans, it does leave a lot of empty seats. I guess that's what sort of happens when you do have a really championship standard stadium, but you currently find yourselves in League 2. Obviously last season it was playoff heartache for Grant McCann's side. Fingers crossed they do manage to get themselves up the divisions over these next few years. The 6th emptiest stadium in England is Brunton Park, where Carlisle United play. I must admit, prior to doing this video, I didn't actually realise how big Brunton Park actually was in terms of how many home fans they can actually get in that ground. They can hold around 18,000, but last season we're only getting home crowds of around about 8k. Now to be fair, I don't blame any Carlisle fans for not going last season. It was a miserable campaign for them in League 1. They finished rock bottom in the end. Must admit, I have had a bit of a soft spot for Carlisle over these last few years because of how many ex-Preston North End players they've picked up. But yeah, last season was a bit of a write-off for them, wasn't it? Hopefully next year in League 2 they'll be a lot more competitive. Coming in as the 5th emptiest stadium in England, it's the DW, home of Wigan Athletic. Last season only 41.5% of that ground was full on on a match day. Now, to be fair with Wigan, I mean, it's a similar story to sort of Blackburn really, isn't it? The DW was built with the intentions of Wigan being a sort of Premier League club. They were a lot closer to capacity during their years in the Premier League, but since dropping out of the top flight, home attendances at Wigan have generally fluctuated between sort of 9,000 to 12,000. Last season in League One, they had average home gates of around 10,400, which for the third tier is not too shabby whatsoever. But due to how big that ground is, it does leave a lot of empty seats. The drawback of having a ground that big, and when your fan base isn't quite at that level at the moment, is it definitely does have a hindrance on atmosphere and things like that. I know that Wigan have tried to shape things around in recent years with sort of moving the more vocal fans to different parts of the stadium and things like that, but you are just going to get large portions of the stadium empty when you're only filling 41% of it on average. Coming in as the fourth emptiest ground in England, it's the JobServe Community Stadium, home to Colchester United, who just about avoided relegation to the National League last season, in the end staying up by just 3 points. Now, to be fair to Colchester, despite their struggles last season, their overall attendances were up on previous years. On average, they had home gates in League Two of around 4,100, but given that stadium does hold over 10,000 fans, it does leave a lot of empty seats. The third emptiest ground in England is Prenton Park, home of Tranmere Rovers. It was a really miserable start to the season for Tranmere, wasn't it? They lost 12 of their first 16 league matches, so I can't blame a lot of fans for losing interest in that early stage of the season. In the end, they managed to salvage things and finish mid-table, but not a campaign to really write home about. On average, they did have home gates of around 6,200, which was an increase on previous years. But given the capacity of Prenton Park is over 16,500, it means that just 37.3% of that ground was full on average. The second emptiest stadium in England last season was Vale Park, which was only 34.8% full on average. Now, to be fair to Port Vale fans, last season was a stinking campaign for them in League One. They were the second worst team in League One last season, ended up being relegated, having only accumulated 41 points all season, and as a result of that, attendances did dwindle. Overall attendances for Port Vale were down last season based on the previous year they had in League One. Only filling 34.8% of your ground does leave a lot of empty seats, but not quite as many as the first place. But by far and away the emptiest ground in the 92, of course it's Stadium MK, and I'm sure a lot of people were expecting this one. But the difference between this and the rest of the top 10 is absolutely staggering. Based on last season's attendances, only 21.6% of that ground was filled. MK Dons as an overall club are really quite fascinating. I think it's fair to say they have a Premier League worthy stadium, but are currently kicking it in League Two. It was obviously playoff heartache for MK Dons last season, did finish in the playoffs in League Two, but weren't able to get over the line in the end. And now with another season of League Two football coming their way, I can't imagine they're going to get much of a spike in attendances next season either. Stadium MK opened in 2007 and has a capacity of 30,500. And in League Two last season, MK Dons were only getting around 6,000 fans on average, which leaves a hell of a lot of empty seats. And I'm sure that's a bit of a weird atmosphere as a player to go ahead and play in when there is that much sort of empty space and empty seats around you. Since Stadium MK opened, last season was the lowest that MK Dons attendances have ever dropped to. That as a result of being in League Two, I'm sure after quite a few years they spent in League One before that. In the club's history, the highest attendances MK Dons have ever had is just over 13,000 when the club was in the Championship back in 2015/16. But even then, their stadium was still half empty. A ground which is definitely too big for that fan base right now. In, I don't know, let's say 50 years from now, it'll be fascinating to see whether or not that fan base has grown to a degree where that ground is even at least half full, let's say. But there you guys have it. That will now wrap it up for today's video. Thought this one would be an interesting look into all of the clubs across the 92 and see which are the emptiest stadiums right now. If you'd like to see more of this sort of content based on fan bases, stadiums and things like that, make sure to show your support on today's video. Drop a comment down below. But apart from that, thank you very much for tuning in, and I'll see you all in the next one.